So recently I did a preset that was trying to create some Iron Maiden type tones. And to do that, I'd used a Marshall amp, and in front of it, I had used an overdrive pedal to try to not add drive, but to kind of shape the tone and really tighten up the bottom end. And I got a couple of comments on the video about it, and I thought it might be worthwhile to go through a few options that exist to accomplish that kind of thing. So take an amp that's kind of a higher gain amp that maybe has a little bit of a looseness on the bottom end, and use some pedals in front of it, not to add gain, but to try to tighten up the bottom end and kind of get some real punchiness out of the tone. So what I've created here is a pretty basic preset to try to go through a few examples of that. So for an amp, what we're using today is we have this Diesel H4, and we're on the channel 4. You can see the gain is only at halfway, but it's a pretty high gain amp. I've got pretty much everything even. I rolled the mid back a little bit and the presence up just a tad, and it sounds like this. So a nice, real kind of beefy, gainy tone, but it's a little loose on the bottom end. So what we want to do is try to put something in front of it that'll kind of tighten that up for us. So we've got a few options here. The first one, which is a really common approach to this, is to use, so here you can see the overdrive is all the way off. We don't want to add any gain. We're just trying to use the two screamer for kind of an EQ shaping. We're pushing the tone a little bit, so adding a little bit of top end that's also rolling some of the bottom end off. And then level's staying at 50%. So we're not trying to push the level. Again, we're just using this as kind of an EQ shaper. And so again, if we listen to the amp without it, it sounds like this. And here it is with it. So you can hear it's not a huge effect, but it is tightening it up. And it's funny, when you're just playing the amp without it, you don't necessarily hear kind of how loose it is until you go to the 808 and then turn the 808 off and you come back to it and suddenly it feels a lot looser. So that works pretty well. One of my favorite ways to do it is actually to use a rat. So in this case, what we do is we are adding a little bit of distortion. You can do this with the distortion all the way off, but I think it works better if you add a little bit of distortion to it, and then you put the filter at about 8 to 9. So really kind of the general sense is put distortion at about 9 o'clock, put the filter at about 3 o'clock, and then leave the volume at around 12 o'clock. And so again, we're just using this to kind of shape some of that bottom end. So if we go back to our amp, and here it is with a rat. And the rat works really great, even if you're doing kind of higher pitched runs. Versus it just tightens everything up. It's especially really nice if you're kind of doing some palm mutes. The rat really makes kind of that pitch attack punchier on the gained amp. And so I think it really works well. So another option, like I used on the Iron Maiden preset, is use the Friedman BE-OD. Again, you can see here the gain, bass, treble, presence are all the way off. The nice thing about this pedal is it's additive. So if you leave everything on 0, it's not taking anything away. It's just not adding anything into it. And then what we do is we use the tight and trim controls kind of in opposite directions to tighten up the sound. In this case, I've gone to the max, meaning I've pushed tight all the way up and pulled the trim all the way down. Sometimes I might put this more like this, kind of like on the rat, where one's at 9 o'clock and one's at 3 o'clock. But for today, we're just going to leave everything kind of maxed out so that we can hear the difference. So again, here's our amp. And here's what the Friedman does. again, just a really nice way to kind of tighten up the gain on the amp and make it sound a little more precise. And the other thing we can do is kind of try to mimic what these pedals are doing just with a graphic EQ. And so this is basically what we're doing with the pedals. The pedals are all doing their own kind of EQ treatment on the amp. And so with the graphic EQ, it allows us to do a similar kind of thing. And I just put some settings here. This is definitely something you can tweak it depending on the amp you're playing through. So what I basically did was, we've got a low cut at 80 and a high cut is at 1400. But really what we're doing is we're just kind of, again, pulling back the lows, pushing those mids, and then pulling back a little bit of the highs. And so again, here's the amp. And with the EQ. So it's another option. It's not my favorite. I think of the four, I like the Rat a lot. And I also like the Friedman quite a bit. Of course, there's other ways to kind of tweak the amp. Obviously, you can adjust some of the amp EQ in the amp settings itself. Obviously, what IR or cabinet you use has a huge impact on this as well. I'm using a V30, which isn't the tightest, which isn't necessarily the tightest speaker anyway. I think you could switch cabinets and get maybe a little bit of a more scooped sound. The V30 adds quite a bit of mids, and that can make things a little muddier. So there's definitely other options to tighten up your sound other than just using these pedals, but they do work really well for this purpose. And if you're playing kind of a higher gain amp model and you want to tighten it up, I think you could do worse than try to throw a Rat or a Friedman in front of it like this and just kind of adjust the EQ parameters of the guitar signal going in so the amp is a little bit tighter for you. Anyway, I hope you found this helpful, and thanks for watching.